"You're under arrest for practicing forbidden rituals," Sergeant Clarence Holt shouted, his voice cutting through the still night as he burst into the moonlit clearing with his men. Kiona froze, her breath catching as she shielded her blind grandfather, Haloke, who sat chanting softly on the ground. Holt's boots crunched the dry earth as he ripped the sacred songbook from her trembling hands, tearing its fragile pages into pieces that fluttered down like dying moths. "You're just a blind old savage," he snarled at Haloke, spitting on the ground near his feet. Fury surged in Kiona's chest, hot and unstoppable. She lunged forward and shoved Holt with all her strength, sending him crashing back into the dirt. He scrambled up, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, his eyes wild with rage as he pointed at her and yelled, "Seize her!" The air thickened with tension, and Kiona's world tilted as the consequences of her defiance roared to life. Kiona, a 28-year-old Zuni woman, lived in the vast sun-scorched lands of New Mexico in 1915, where red cliffs glowed under endless skies. She wove the spirit of her people into every piece of jewelry she crafted, her fingers steady as they shaped silver and stone, and she memorized the ancient songs her grandfather, Haloke, taught her. At 70, Haloke was blind, his eyes clouded like the desert haze, but his voice carried the strength of generations, guiding Kiona through the rituals that bound them to their ancestors. They lived in a small adobe home, its walls weathered by time, surrounded by a world that mocked their ways. The white settlers sneered at their traditions, calling them relics of a dead past, while the authorities hunted anyone who dared to sing the old songs, threatening handcuffs and jail. Kiona felt the strain in her bones, torn between guarding her heritage and keeping Haloke safe, her resolve tested further by whispers of betrayal from her tribe as she shared their melodies with Sarah, a white woman with a notebook and curious eyes. The desert night was still, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel like a secret. Kiona sat cross-legged on the cool earth, her voice soft as she guided her grandfather, Haloke, through an ancient Zuni song. The moonlight bathed them in silver, turning the red cliffs into shadows that seemed to lean in, listening. Haloke, his eyes milky with blindness, nodded along, his wrinkled hands resting on his knees. He hummed the melody, his voice trembling but steady, like a river finding its way through stones. Kiona paused to correct a note, her words gentle, as if the song itself was fragile. Haloke smiled, his face creasing with memories of his own grandfather teaching him the same tune. They sang together, their voices weaving a thread of connection that stretched back through generations. Kiona felt a warmth in her chest, a pride that glowed like the stars above. But then, the distant thud of hooves broke the spell. Her heart skipped, and she turned toward the sound. Dust rose in the distance, and the moonlight glinted off metal badges. The peace shattered like glass, and Kiona's breath caught in her throat as the riders drew closer. The riders burst into the clearing, their horses snorting and stamping. Sergeant Clarence Holt dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His face was twisted with anger, eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. "You're under arrest for practicing forbidden rituals," he barked, his voice slicing through the night. Kiona scrambled to her feet, stepping in front of Haloke, who sat frozen, his chant dying on his lips. Holt strode forward, his hand snatching the songbook from Kiona's grasp. She gasped, reaching for it, but he held it high, his fingers digging into the leather cover. With a sneer, he tore the pages one by one, letting them flutter to the ground like wounded birds. "You're just a blind old savage," he spat at Haloke, his words sharp as knives. Haloke flinched, his hands trembling, but he said nothing. Kiona's shock turned to rage, her chest tightening as if a storm was building inside her. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, and took a step forward, her eyes blazing. The air crackled with tension as Kiona glared at Holt. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged forward and shoved him hard. Holt stumbled back, his boots slipping on the loose dirt, and he crashed to the ground with a grunt. The other officers gasped, their hands flying to their guns. Holt scrambled up, his face red with fury, a trickle of blood running from a cut on his forehead. "You'll pay for that," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at Kiona. "Seize her!" 2 officers grabbed her arms, their grips like iron. Kiona struggled, her heart pounding in her ears, but they held her tight. Holt wiped the blood from his face, his eyes wild. "You're a criminal now," he hissed, "assaulting an officer." Kiona's breath came in short gasps, her mind racing. She looked back at Haloke, who sat helpless, his face pale. The weight of her actions crashed down on her like a wave, and she realized she had just made everything worse. Back in their small adobe home, Kiona paced the floor, her footsteps echoing in the dim room. The air was thick with the smell of sage and worry. She glanced at Haloke, who sat quietly by the fire, his hands folded in his lap. "I shouldn't have pushed him," she whispered, her voice cracking. Haloke lifted his head, his blind eyes seeming to see her anyway. "Come here, child," he said softly. Kiona knelt beside him, her hands trembling. He took them in his skin warm and rough. "Our people have faced worse," he said, his voice steady as a drumbeat. He told her of ancestors who hid in canyons, singing in whispers to keep the songs alive. Kiona's tears fell, but she listened, feeling the strength of their history like a shield. Haloke squeezed her hands. "You are brave, Kiona. Do not let fear steal that from you." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and for a moment the weight on her chest lifted. The next day, Kiona slipped into Sarah's small office, her heart pounding. The room smelled of ink and paper, a world away from the desert winds. Sarah looked up from her desk, her eyes kind but sharp. "Kiona, I'm glad you came," she said, offering a chair. Kiona sat, her fingers twisting in her lap. "We need to record the songs," she said, her voice urgent, "before they're lost." Sarah nodded, her face serious. "I have a way," she said, pulling out a strange machine with wires and a horn. Kiona stared, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Sarah explained how it could capture sound, like trapping a bird song in a cage. Kiona's hope sparked, but doubt lingered. "Will it work?" she asked. Sarah smiled. "It will if we're careful." They talked late into the afternoon, planning in hushed tones. Kiona felt a flicker of trust, a bridge forming between their worlds. As she left, the sun dipped low, and she wondered if this was the path to saving her people's voice. The tribal meeting was held in the elders' lodge, the air thick with smoke and tension. Kiona stood before the council, her back straight, but her stomach churned. The chief elder, his face lined with age, spoke first. "You bring a white woman into our songs," he said, his voice heavy with disapproval. Kiona swallowed hard. "She can help us preserve them," she argued, her words careful. Whispers rippled through the room, some nodding, others shaking their heads. A younger man stood, his eyes hard. "You trust her too much," he said. "She'll steal our ways." Kiona's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "Our ways are dying," she said, her voice rising. "We must adapt." The elder raised a hand, silencing the room. "You walk a dangerous path, Kiona," he warned. "Do not lose yourself." The meeting ended, and Kiona left, her heart heavy with doubt. Outside, the wind howled as if echoing the storm inside her. Holt sat in his office, his fingers drumming on the desk. Lyle stood before him, his hat in hand. "I want eyes on her at all times," Holt growled. "She's planning something." Lyle nodded, his face eager. "I'll set up near her home," he said. Holt leaned back, his mind racing. He pictured the Zuni land, ripe for the taking, if only he could break their spirit. "She's the key," he muttered. "Break her, and the rest will follow." Lyle left, and Holt stared out the window, watching the dust swirl. Meanwhile, Kiona felt the weight of unseen eyes. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle a warning. She glanced over her shoulder as she walked, her skin prickling. At home, she checked the doors twice, her hands shaking. The air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were watching. She knew Holt was closing in, and time was slipping through her fingers like sand. The desert stretched wide and empty, the sun a merciless eye overhead. Kiona led Haloke by the hand, his steps slow and careful. They reached an old adobe hut, half crumbled, hidden among the rocks. "Here," she said, guiding him inside. The air was cool and musty, the floor covered in dust. Kiona helped Haloke sit, arranging blankets around him. "I'll come back soon," she promised, her voice tight. Haloke reached out, his hand finding her cheek. "Be careful, granddaughter," he whispered. Kiona nodded, though he couldn't see. She left him a jug of water and a small pouch of food. As she turned to go, her heart ached like a string pulled too tight. The hut door creaked shut behind her, and she walked away, the desert swallowing her footsteps. The silence pressed in, and she wondered if she was strong enough to carry this burden alone. Sarah arrived at the adobe hut, her arms full with a wooden box. Kiona watched as she set it down, revealing a machine with gears and a large horn. "This is a phonograph," Sarah explained, her eyes bright. "It can record your voice." Kiona leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. Sarah turned a crank, and a wax cylinder spun. "Sing into this," she said, pointing to the horn. Kiona hesitated, then sang a few notes, her voice trembling. The machine whirred, capturing the sound. Sarah played it back, and Kiona's own voice echoed in the small room. She gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like magic," she whispered. Sarah smiled. "It's science," she said, "but yes, it's wonderful." Kiona touched the machine, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time, she saw a way to keep the songs alive, even if the world tried to silence them. Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile but real. Lyle crouched behind a boulder, his eyes fixed on the hut. He had followed Kiona's tracks through the desert, his boots silent on the sand. Inside, he saw shadows moving, heard the faint hum of voices. He crept closer, his breath shallow. Through a crack in the wall, he saw Kiona and Sarah, huddled over a strange device. Kiona was singing, her voice soft and clear. Lyle's eyes narrowed. This was what Holt needed. He slipped away, his heart pounding with excitement. Back at the station, he burst into Holt's office. "She's recording something," he panted, with the white woman. Holt's chair scraped back as he stood, his face alight with triumph. "Good," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now we have them." He grabbed his hat and strode out, Lyle at his heels. The hunt was on, and Kiona's secret was no longer safe. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the adobe house where Kiona hid with Haloke. Tse arrived quietly, his arms full with a woven basket of supplies. He knocked softly, and Kiona opened the door, her face lighting up with relief. Inside, the air smelled of dried herbs and dust. Tse set the basket on the small wooden table, revealing fresh bread, a jar of water, and a blanket. "I thought you might need these," he said, his voice warm. Kiona's eyes softened, and she touched his arm gently. "Thank you, Tse. You're risking so much." He shrugged, his smile crooked. "We're family, Kiona." Family helps. They sat by the flickering fire, the flames dancing in the dim light. Tse told her about the village, how people whispered about her bravery. Kiona listened, her heart swelling with gratitude. But worry gnawed at her. She didn't want Tease caught in Holt's web. "Please, be careful," she whispered. T nodded, his eyes serious. "I will, but you're not alone in this." As he left, Kiona watched him disappear into the twilight, feeling a spark of hope. She wasn't alone. She had friends who believed in her. Holt stormed into Sarah's office, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. The small room felt even smaller with his anger filling the space. Sarah looked up from her desk, her pen still in hand, but her heart raced. Holt's face was red, his eyes blazing like coals. "You're meddling in things that don't concern you," he growled, slamming his fist on the table. Papers scattered, and Sarah flinched but held her ground. "I'm doing my job," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Holt leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. "Stay away from the Zuni, or you'll regret it." Sarah's hands trembled, but she met his gaze. "I won't be scared off," she replied, her chin lifting defiantly. Holt's lip curled in a sneer. "You will be," he hissed. He turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the door banging behind him. Sarah sank into her chair, her breath coming in short gasps. She knew Holt's threats were real, but she also knew she couldn't abandon Kiona. Not now, not ever. The sacred site was quiet, the air thick with the scent of sage and earth. Kiona knelt by the ancient stones, her fingers tracing the carvings worn smooth by time. As she stood, something caught her eye, a small piece of paper wedged between two rocks. She pulled it free, her brow furrowing. The paper was rough, the writing hurried. "Beware the serpent's tongue." It was signed with a symbol, a crescent moon. Kiona's heart skipped. She'd never seen anything like it. She turned the paper over, but there was nothing else. The wind whispered through the canyon, and she shivered, feeling eyes on her. Was this a warning? A threat? She tucked the note into her pocket, her mind racing. That night she showed it to Haloke, her voice trembling as she read it aloud. He listened, his face thoughtful. "It might be a friend," he said slowly, "or a trick." Kiona nodded, uncertainty gnawing at her. But deep down, she hoped it was a sign that someone was watching over them. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the adobe walls. Haloke sat close to the warmth, his blind eyes closed as he spoke. "Long ago," he began, his voice low and rhythmic, "there was a protector of our people known as the Night Singer." Kiona leaned forward, her breath held. "He came in times of great need, his face hidden, his voice like the wind." Haloke's hands moved as if painting the story in the air. "He left signs, small tokens, to guide those who were lost." Kiona thought of the note, her pulse quickening. "He wore a red scarf," Haloke continued, "and his songs could heal or harm." The fire popped, and Kiona jumped. "Is he real?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Haloke smiled, his face creasing like old leather. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps he's a spirit watching over us." Kiona stared into the flames, imagining a figure in the shadows, a guardian in the night. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope, like a star piercing the dark. The Elder's Lodge was filled with the scent of burning sage and the murmur of voices. Kiona stood in the center, her back straight, facing the council. The chief elder, his hair silver as moonlight, spoke first. "You bring outsiders into our sacred ways," he said, his tone heavy with disapproval. Kiona's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. "I'm trying to save our songs," she said, her voice clear. "If we don't record them, they'll be lost." A younger elder scoffed. "You trust a white woman with our secrets?" Kiona's cheeks flushed. She respects our ways, she argued. She can help us. The room buzzed with whispers, some nodding, others shaking their heads. The chief elder raised his hand for silence. You risk too much, Kiona, he warned. Our traditions are not for sale. Kiona's heart sank, but she refused to back down. I'm not selling them, she said, her voice trembling. I'm protecting them. The meeting ended with no decision, and Kiona left, her steps heavy. Outside, the wind howled, mirroring the storm in her heart. The door to Kiona's home hung open, the lock broken. Inside, chaos reigned. Holt and Lyle tore through the small space, their boots scuffing the dirt floor. Holt yanked open drawers, spilling beads and feathers. Where is it? He muttered, his face twisted with frustration. Lyle kicked over a chair, his eyes scanning the room. Maybe she hid it, he suggested. Holt grunted, his hands rifling through a woven basket. He found nothing but dried herbs and old cloth. She's clever, he growled, but not clever enough. He scrawled a note on a scrap of paper. We're watching, and pinned it to the wall with a knife. The blade gleamed in the dim light. They left, the door slamming shut behind them. Hours later, Kiona returned, her heart dropping at the sight of the broken lock. She stepped inside, her breath catching at the destruction. Her eyes found the note, and fear coiled in her stomach. But then anger flared, hot and bright. She tore the note down, crumpling it in her fist. Holt wouldn't break her. The marketplace was busy, the air filled with the chatter of vendors and the scent of fresh bread. Sarah walked briskly, her mind on Kiona and the recordings. She didn't see Lyle until he stepped out from an alley, his shadow falling over her. Going somewhere? He sneered, his hand clamping on her arm. Sarah gasped, trying to pull free, but his grip was iron. He dragged her into the alley, away from prying eyes. Holt says you're a problem, he hissed, shoving her against the wall. Sarah's back hit the rough stone, pain shooting through her. Let me go, she demanded, her voice shaking. Lyle laughed, a cruel sound. Not until you learn your place. He raised his fist, and Sarah flinched, but the blow never came. Instead, he smashed a recording device, the wood splintering under his boot. Stay out of Zuni business, he warned, his face inches from hers. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah trembling, her heart pounding. She slid to the ground, tears stinging her eyes, but resolve hardened inside her. She wouldn't give up. The sacred site felt different at night, the air heavy with mystery. Kiona knelt by the stones, her hands trembling as she placed a small offering, a feather and a polished stone. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible, help me. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of distant rain. She waited, her breath held, but nothing happened. Disappointment weighed on her, and she turned to leave. Then she saw it, a new note, tucked under a rock. Her heart leaped as she unfolded it. Look to the serpent's lair, it read, signed with the crescent moon. Kiona's mind raced. The serpent's lair was an old cave nearby. She clutched the note, hope and fear warring inside her. Was this a trap or a lifeline? She didn't know, but she had to find out. With a deep breath, she set off toward the cave, the desert stretching dark and endless around her. The night was alive with whispers, and Kiona felt eyes on her, unseen but present. The camp was quiet, the fire burning low as Holt's men slept. Kiona crept closer, her heart pounding in her ears. She had followed the note's clue to this place, her body low to the ground like a shadow. The tent flaps rustled in the breeze, and she slipped inside Holt's tent, her breath shallow. Papers littered the desk, maps and letters strewn about. She scanned them quickly, her eyes catching words like land seizure and gold deposits. Her stomach churned as she realized the truth. Holt wasn't just harassing them, he was planning to steal their land. She found a map, marked with red X's, each one a sacred site. Her hands shook as she folded the map and tucked it into her shirt. Suddenly, voices outside made her freeze. Footsteps approached, and she ducked behind a crate, her pulse racing. Holt entered, muttering to himself, his shadow looming on the tent wall. Kiona held her breath, praying he wouldn't see her. After a tense moment, he left, and she exhaled, slipping out into the night, the stolen map burning against her skin. Back in the adobe house, Kiona spread the map on the table, her hands still trembling. The firelight flickered over the red marks, each one a wound on her people's land. She read the letters, her eyes widening with every word. Holt and a man named Baxter planned to mine for gold, destroying the sacred sites in the process. They would drive the Zuni away, claiming the land was unused. Kiona's chest tightened, anger and fear crashing inside her like waves. This wasn't just about songs or rituals. It was about survival. She thought of Haloke, of the ancestors buried in that earth, of the children who would never know their heritage. Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away, her jaw set. "They won't take it," she whispered, her voice fierce. She knew what she had to do, expose them, no matter the cost. The weight of the fight settled on her shoulders, but she stood tall, ready to face the storm. For her people, for Haloke, for the land that sang in her blood. The small adobe house felt like a sanctuary, its walls thick and cool against the desert heat. Kiona sat at the wooden table, the stolen map spread out before her like a battle plan. Sarah leaned over, her eyes scanning the red marks that scarred the land. "This is worse than I thought," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with worry. Kiona nodded, her fingers tracing the lines that cut through sacred sites. "They want to tear it all apart," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "For gold." Sarah's face hardened, and she placed a hand on Kiona's shoulder. "We can stop them," she said firmly, "but we need proof." Kiona pulled out the letters she'd taken, each one a piece of the puzzle. Sarah read them quickly, her brow furrowing deeper with each word. "These are damning," she muttered. "If we can get these to the right people." Kiona's heart raced at the thought. "There's a journalist in Santa Fe," Sarah continued, her mind already working. "He's fair, and he's not afraid of men like Holt." Kiona felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. "Can we trust him?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "I think so, but we have to be careful." They spent the next hour planning, their voices low and urgent. By the time Sarah left, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and Kiona felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She wasn't alone in this fight, and that made all the difference. The marketplace was bustling, the air filled with the scent of roasted corn and the chatter of traders. Tsi walked through the crowd, his steps light, his mind on Kiona and the supplies he'd promised to bring. He didn't see the shadows moving behind him until it was too late. A rough hand grabbed his arm, yanking him into a narrow alley. Tse spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. 3 men stood there, their faces twisted with malice. "You've been helping the witch," one of them sneered, his breath hot and foul. Tse's eyes widened. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, but his voice shook. The man laughed, a cruel sound, and shoved Tse against the wall. Pain shot through his back, and he gasped. "We know you're with her," another man growled, stepping closer. Tse's mind raced, searching for a way out, but the alley was a dead end. The first man drew a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. "Tell us where she is," he demanded. Tse clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. The knife flashed and pain exploded in his side. He cried out, doubling over, but the men didn't stop. Blows rained down, fists and boots, each one a hammer of agony. Say fell to the ground, curling into a ball, his vision blurring. Through the haze, he heard one of them say, "This is a warning. Next time, it'll be worse." Then, darkness swallowed him whole. When he woke, the alley was empty, and every breath was a struggle. He dragged himself to his feet, blood staining his shirt, and stumbled toward Kiona's hiding place, his only thought to warn her. The adobe house was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of sage and worry. Kiona knelt beside Haloke, her hands gentle as she adjusted the blanket around his frail shoulders. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, and each wheeze tugged at her heart. "Grandfather," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Haloke's eyes fluttered open, milky and unfocused. "Kiona," he murmured, a faint smile touching his lips. She took his hand, her fingers wrapping around his, feeling the bones beneath the skin. "You need to rest," she said softly. He shook his head, a small, stubborn gesture. "I've rested enough," he replied, his voice a rasp. Kiona's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Haloke squeezed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Fear is a shadow," he said, "but you are the light." Kiona blinked back tears, his words a balm to her aching heart. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound, the crackle of the fire. Then Haloke spoke again, his voice distant, as if recalling a dream. "I remember when you were small," he said, "chasing the wind, laughing like the river." Kiona smiled through her tears, the memory vivid in her mind. "I'll always be that girl," she promised. Haloke nodded, his eyes closing once more. "And I'll always be here," he whispered, his voice fading like the last light of day. The town square was alive with the bustle of market day, stalls overflowing with colorful goods, and the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and roasted meat. Kiona stood at the edge, her heart pounding like a war drum. She spotted Holt near the fountain, his uniform crisp, his posture arrogant as he spoke to a group of townsfolk. Anger surged through her, hot and fierce, and before she could second-guess herself, she strode forward. "Holt!" she called, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. Heads turned, eyes widening as she approached. Holt's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want, witch?" he spat, his tone dripping with contempt. Kiona's hands clenched into fists. "I know what you're planning," she said, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "You're trying to steal our land, destroy our sacred places for your greed." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Holt's face turned crimson. "Lies!" he bellowed, stepping toward her. "You're a liar and a criminal." Kiona stood her ground, her eyes blazing. "I have proof," she said, her voice steady, "and I'll make sure everyone knows." Holt's hand twitched toward his gun, but he stopped himself, aware of the watching eyes. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Kiona met his gaze, unflinching. "No," she said. "You will," the crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking away in fear. Kiona turned and walked away, her head high, feeling the weight of their stares. She knew she'd just painted a target on her back, but she also knew she'd struck a blow. The truth was out, and it couldn't be unspoken. Sarah's small office was cluttered with books and papers, the air smelling faintly of ink and dust. She sat at her desk, her pen scratching furiously as she wrote letter after letter. Each one was a plea for help, addressed to journalists, lawmakers, anyone who might listen. Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. "We need allies," she muttered to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. She thought of Kiona, of Haloke, of the sacred lands under threat, and her resolve hardened. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young man, his hat in hand. "I heard about what you're doing," he said, his voice earnest. I want to help. Sarah's heart lifted. Thank you, she said, ushering him inside. They talked for hours, strategizing, planning. He told her about others who might join, people tired of Holt's greed. Sarah scribbled notes, her mind racing with possibilities. By the time he left, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone. There were others who cared. She picked up her pen again, her movements swift and sure. We can do this, she whispered, her eyes bright with determination. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the town. Sarah worked late into the night, her candle burning low, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. The sacred site was bathed in moonlight, the ancient stones casting long, eerie shadows. Kiona approached cautiously, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. She knelt by the altar, her fingers brushing the cool stone. There, tucked beneath a small rock, was another note. Her heart quickened as she unfolded it. The serpent's lair holds the key, it read, signed with the familiar crescent moon. Kiona's mind raced. The serpent's lair was a cave not far from here, a place of legend and fear. She hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at her. Was this a trap, or a chance to uncover more of Holt's plans? She thought of Haloke, of Tse, of the land they were fighting for, and her resolve hardened. I have to go, she whispered to herself. She stood, tucking the note into her pocket, and set off toward the cave. The night was alive with the sounds of the desert, crickets chirping, the distant howl of a coyote. Kiona felt a presence, as if the spirits were watching, guiding her steps. She reached the cave's mouth, a dark maw in the cliffside, and took a deep breath. With a final glance at the stars above, she stepped inside, the darkness swallowing her whole. The cave was cool and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and stone. Kiona moved slowly, her hands tracing the rough walls for guidance. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw faint markings on the walls, ancient symbols of her people. She followed them deeper, her heart pounding. At the end of the tunnel she found a small chamber, and there, hidden in a crevice, was a wooden box. She pried it open, her fingers trembling. Inside were more documents, letters between Holt and Baxter, detailing their plans in cold, calculated words. Kiona's breath caught as she read about the forced removal of her people, the destruction of their homes. Rage boiled inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She tucked the papers into her bag, her mind already racing with how to use them. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the cave, a distant rumble. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was someone coming? She hurried back the way she came, her footsteps quick and light. As she emerged into the night, she heard shouts in the distance. Holt's men, she realized, her blood running cold. She slipped into the shadows, her breath held, and watched as they passed by, oblivious to her presence. Once they were gone, she ran, the documents clutched tight, her resolve stronger than ever. The desert night was shattered by the roar of flames. Kiona watched from a distance, her heart sinking as the cache burned. Baxter's men had found it, their torches turning the wooden structure into a blazing inferno. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning paper. Kiona's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. All those documents, all that evidence, gone. She felt a wave of despair, heavy and suffocating. But then she remembered the papers she'd taken, safely hidden in her bag. It wasn't everything, but it was something. She forced herself to breathe, to think. They can't destroy the truth, she whispered, her voice fierce. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the sky like dying stars. Baxter stood nearby, his face lit by the flames, a cruel smile on his lips. Kiona turned away, her jaw set. She would find another way, gather more proof, rally more people. Baxter and Holt wouldn't win, not while she still had breath in her body. With one last look at the burning cache, she slipped into the darkness, her spirit unbroken. The tribal meeting was held in the elders' lodge, the air thick with tension and the scent of burning sage. Kiona stood before the council, her back straight, her eyes fierce. "They're coming for our land," she said, her voice ringing clear. "They want to tear it apart, destroy our sacred places." She held up the documents she'd saved, the paper rustling in her hands. "This is their plan," she continued, "but we can stop them." The elders leaned forward, their faces grave. One of them, a woman with silver hair, spoke. "How?" she asked, her voice sharp. Kiona took a deep breath. "We need to stand together," she said. "Show them we won't be moved." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nodding, others looking doubtful. C stepped forward, his face bruised but his eyes bright. "Kiona's right," he said. "We've hidden too long." The chief elder raised his hand and the room fell silent. "This is a dangerous path," he said, his voice heavy, "but perhaps it's the only one left." He looked at Kiona, his gaze piercing. "Lead us then." Kiona's heart swelled, a mix of pride and fear. She nodded, her voice steady. "I will." The lodge buzzed with energy. The tribe united at last. The ceremony was sacred, the air filled with the sound of drums and the scent of burning herbs. The tribe gathered in a circle, their faces painted with symbols of protection. Kiona stood at the center, her voice rising in song, her heart heavy with the weight of tradition. Suddenly, the rhythm faltered as shouts echoed from the edge of the gathering. Garrett, Holt's right-hand man, strode into the circle, his boots kicking up dust. "This is illegal!" he bellowed, his face twisted with anger. The drum stopped, and silence fell like a stone. Kiona stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "This is our land," she said, her voice steady. "Our right," Garrett sneered, his hand resting on his gun. "Not for long," he spat. He signaled to his men, who began to push through the crowd, shoving people aside. Chaos erupted, cries of protest mixing with the sound of struggle. Tse tried to intervene, but a blow sent him sprawling, blood trickling from his lip. Kiona's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "We won't be silenced," she shouted, her voice rising above the din. The tribe rallied around her, their faces set with determination. Garrett's men hesitated, sensing the shift. With a grunt of frustration, Garrett turned and stormed away, his threats hanging in the air like smoke. The ceremony resumed, the drums beating stronger than before, a defiant heartbeat in the night. The night was deep and still as Kiona sat by the fire in the adobe house. She stared at the map she had stolen from Holt's tent, her fingers tracing the red X's marking the sacred sites. The flames flickered, casting shadows on her face, and her heart felt heavy with fear. She thought of her ancestors, their voices in the wind, now threatened by greed. Haloke slept nearby, his soft breathing a comfort, but her mind raced with plans. She folded the map carefully and hid it under a loose floorboard. Then she heard a noise outside, a faint rustle, and her body tensed. She grabbed a knife, her pulse quickening, and peeked through the window. It was only the wind, but her nerves stayed sharp, her resolve growing stronger. Morning broke with a pale light filtering through the cracked window. Kiona woke early, her eyes tired but determined. She boiled water over the fire and made tea, the steam warming her hands. Haloke stirred, his blind eyes opening, and she told him about the map. His face grew serious as he listened, his fingers tapping the table. "We need proof," he said, his voice firm. Kiona nodded, sipping her tea, the bitter taste grounding her. She decided to meet Sarah, hoping her friend could help spread the truth. As she stepped outside, the cold air bit her skin, but she pulled her shawl tight and walked toward the village, her steps steady. Sarah sat in her small office, her desk still a mess from Holt's outburst. She rubbed her sore shoulder where Lyle had shoved her, the pain a dull ache. The broken recording device lay in pieces on the floor, and she sighed, feeling defeated. Then a knock came, soft but urgent, and she opened the door to find Kiona. Her friend's eyes were bright with purpose, and Sarah felt a spark of hope. Kiona showed her the map, explaining Holt's plan in a rush. Sarah's jaw tightened, anger replacing her fear. She grabbed a notebook, her pen scratching fast as she wrote down every detail. "We'll stop him," she promised, her voice fierce, and Kiona smiled, grateful. The village buzzed with life as Kiona and Sarah walked through the marketplace. People bartered for bread and cloth, their voices loud and cheerful. Kiona kept the map hidden in her shawl, her eyes scanning for Holt's men. Sarah stayed close, her notebook tucked under her arm, her steps quick. They reached a quiet corner, and Kiona spoke softly, suggesting they show the map to the elders. Sarah agreed, but worry creased her brow. She knew Holt's threats were real. A child ran by, laughing, and Kiona's heart lifted briefly. Then she saw Lyle across the square, his eyes narrowing, and she pulled Sarah behind a stall, her breath catching. The elder's lodge was warm, the air thick with sage smoke. Kiona stood before the council again, her hands steady as she held the map. The chief elder frowned, his silver hair glinting in the light, and asked what it meant. Kiona explained Holt's plan, her voice rising with passion, pointing to each red X. The younger elder leaned forward, his doubt fading as he studied the map. Whispers filled the room, some angry, some afraid, and Kiona felt their weight. She begged them to act, her eyes pleading, and the chief elder nodded slowly. "We will fight," he said, his tone grave, and Kiona's chest swelled with relief, though fear lingered. Night fell, and Kiona returned to the sacred site alone. The stones loomed dark against the starry sky, and she knelt, her hands cold on the earth. She whispered a prayer, asking for strength, her voice trembling. The wind answered, soft and steady, and she felt a presence, unseen but close. She left another offering, a small bead from her necklace, and stood, her shawl fluttering. Then she saw a shadow move, quick and silent, and her heart leaped. A note appeared under a rock, and she grabbed it, reading, "The serpent strikes soon." Fear gripped her, but she clutched the note, determined to face whatever came. Holt stood in his tent, his temper boiling as he read a letter from Baxter. The fire outside snapped, and his men grumbled, tired from their watch. He crumpled the paper, his fist shaking, and barked orders to Lyle. "Find her tonight," he growled, his voice like thunder. Lyle nodded, his grin cruel, and grabbed a lantern. Holt paced, his boots scuffing the dirt, his mind on the gold beneath the Zuni land. He pictured Kiona's defiance, and his anger flared hotter. He smashed a cup against the table, the shards flying, and swore to crush her resistance, his eyes wild with rage. Sarah worked late, her lantern flickering on her desk. She wrote letters to officials, her hand cramped but steady, detailing Holt's scheme. The room was silent, save for the scratch of her pen, and her heart pounded with urgency. She thought of Kiona, brave and alone, and pushed harder, her words sharp. A noise outside made her jump, and she peeked out, seeing only darkness. She sealed the letters, her fingers trembling, and hid them in a drawer. Exhaustion tugged at her, but she smiled faintly, feeling the fight in her bones. She wouldn't let Kiona down, no matter the cost. Kiona crept through the desert, the cave of the serpent's lair ahead. The moon hung low, casting silver light on the sand, and her breath fogged in the cold. She gripped a stick for defense, her palms sweaty despite the chill. The cave mouth yawned black, and she hesitated, her heart racing. She thought of the notes, the crescent moon, and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing. Shadows danced on the walls, and she found a box, old and dusty. Inside were papers, proof of Holt's deals, and her eyes widened, hope surging. She tucked them into her shirt, her resolve ironclad. The adobe house was quiet as Kiona returned, the fire nearly dead. She lit a candle, its glow soft, and spread the new papers beside the map. Her hands shook as she read, each word a knife to her heart. Dates, names, plans to destroy her home. Haloke woke, sensing her distress, and she told him everything, her voice breaking. He reached for her hand, his touch warm, and said, "You are enough." Tears fell, but she wiped them away, anger rising over fear. She vowed to show the world, her spirit blazing. The night stretched on, but Kiona felt alive, ready to fight for her people. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert as Kiona and Sarah trudged back to the adobe house. Kiona gripped the stolen documents, her knuckles white with tension. Her heart pounded with both fear and hope. Sarah walked beside her, her steps slow, her face pale from the day's strain. They had escaped Holt's men, but the danger was far from over. As they neared the house, Kiona noticed the wooden door ajar, creaking in the wind. Her breath caught. She motioned for Sarah to wait and crept forward, peering inside. The room was a mess, chairs toppled, and papers strewn across the floor. Haloke sat in the corner, his blind eyes searching the air. "Kiona?" he called, his voice fragile. She hurried to him, her relief overwhelming as she saw he was safe. "I'm here, grandfather," she said, her voice soft. She helped him stand, his frail hands trembling in hers. The air felt heavy, charged with the threat of Holt's next move. Darkness cloaked the desert as Kiona and Sarah pored over the documents by candlelight. The flame flickered, casting shadows on the walls. The papers outlined Holt's scheme to take the Zuni land, listing dates and fake agreements. Kiona's stomach twisted as she read her neighbors' names marked for removal. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she clenched her jaw. "We have to show this to someone," she said, her voice firm despite the quiver. Kiona hesitated, her mind racing. "Who won't betray us?" she asked, her words barely audible. Sarah paused, then said, "Judge Ramirez in Santa Fe. He's honest." Kiona felt a spark of hope ignite. They wrapped the documents in cloth, tying it with string. Haloke listened quietly from his chair, his presence steadying them. Kiona's chest tightened with the weight of their plan. One wrong step could ruin everything, but they had no choice. Morning light spilled over the dunes as Kiona and Sarah searched the village for a messenger. The air was cool, the streets silent except for their footsteps. Kiona spotted Miguel, a swift runner with a sharp mind. She explained their need, her voice urgent. Miguel's face grew serious, his dark eyes steady. "I'll do it," he said, taking the bundle. Kiona pressed it into his hands, her fingers brushing his. "Stay safe," she pleaded. He gave a quick nod, mounted his horse, and galloped off, dust swirling in his wake. Kiona watched him vanish, her heart thudding with worry. Sarah squeezed her arm, her touch warm. "He's fast. He'll get through," she said. Kiona forced a smile, but dread gnawed at her insides. Back at the house, Kiona cared for Haloke, her hands gentle but shaking. She boiled water, adding herbs to make tea, the steam rising in curls. Haloke drank slowly, his lips dry and cracked. "You're brave, Kiona," he said, his voice weak but warm. She smiled, her throat tight. "Because of you," she replied, smoothing his blanket. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Kiona's mind drifted to their fight, the stake so high it hurt to think about. Haloke coughed, a raspy sound, and her chest ached with fear for him. She hummed a song from her childhood, her voice soft, wrapping them both in its comfort. His breathing eased, and she stayed close, her love for him fierce. Time dragged as Kiona and Sarah waited for word from Miguel. The village buzzed with unease, rumors swirling like dust storms. Kiona met with the elders, her words bold as she urged them to stand together. One night, Miguel stumbled in, his shirt soaked with sweat, his grin wide. "The judge believes us," he panted, handing her a letter. Kiona's hands trembled as she read Ramirez's promise to act. Joy surged through her, but caution lingered. Holt would strike back. She hugged Miguel, her voice breaking with thanks. The stars glittered above, and she shared the news with Sarah and Haloke, their faces lighting up with fragile hope. Holt stormed around his office, his boots scuffing the floor. The judge's investigation had reached him, and rage burned in his chest. He kicked a chair, its wood splintering. "Who talked?" he bellowed. Lyle flinched, his hat in his hands. "Maybe Sarah," he mumbled. Holt's eyes darkened. "Then she's next," he spat. He barked orders, his voice sharp as a blade. His men grabbed rifles, their movements quick and tense. Holt stared out the window, the desert stretching endlessly before him. He pictured the wealth he craved slipping away, and his fists clenched. He would not lose, not to Kiona or anyone. The village prepared for Judge Ramirez's visit, the square alive with purpose. Kiona helped raise a tent, its fabric snapping in the breeze. She wore her mother's necklace, the beads cool against her skin. The judge arrived, his gray hair neat, his gaze sharp yet kind. Kiona handed him the documents, her voice steady as she spoke. The crowd leaned in, their silence heavy with hope. Ramirez studied the pages, his brow furrowed. "This is enough," he said at last, his tone grave. Cheers broke out, loud and wild. Kiona's eyes stung with tears, her relief raw and real. But Holt's shadow loomed, dark and threatening. Holt's fury exploded as he rallied his men, their horses snorting in the heat. "We take it now," he growled, his face twisted with hate. They rode hard, dust choking the air, their weapons glinting. Kiona heard the thunder of hooves and rallied the villagers, their line firm around the sacred ground. She faced Holt as he leapt down, his gun raised. "Give up," he snarled. Kiona stood tall, her heart racing but unbroken. "Never," she shot back, her voice ringing. The wind howled, carrying her defiance. Shots pierced the air, Holt's men firing wildly to scare them. The villagers held strong, their faces set. Kiona lifted her hand, then sang, her voice cutting through the chaos. Others joined, their song rising, fierce and unbroken. Holt's men faltered, their shouts fading. The judge and his deputies rode in, dust billowing behind them. "Drop it, Holt," Ramirez ordered, his voice iron. Holt's glare burned, but his shoulders slumped. He tossed his gun down, his dream shattered. Kiona's chest heaved, victory bitter but sweet. The village glowed with triumph, though scars remained. Holt was hauled away, his men silent in defeat. Kiona found Haloke, his smile faint but real. "We won," she whispered, holding his hand. "You won," he replied, his voice fading. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold. Kiona walked among her people, their laughter soft but alive. The land was theirs, safe once more. She felt Haloke's spirit with her, guiding her forward, their story enduring.